Okay, so the question is, what do we do with the concept of ignore the behavior, not the child, right? So we've got a lot of myths that come back from the evidence-based practice of extinction. So extinction is basically ignoring a behavior so that you don't give it a response so that it doesn't become a pattern, right? And it's a very clinical-based strategy that when you can control all the factors around it, there's a reason why it's evidence-based. What's tough is people have tried to use it in education and it doesn't quite match. So we end up ignoring child. We end up actually reinforcing different patterns of behavior that are not conducive to moving forward. And it takes a lot of the relationship piece out of an interaction. And so when we think about extinction as an evidence-based practice, does it work? Yeah, there's evidence behind that. But most likely inside the classroom, inside the educational situation in which we're kind of moving forward in, it's not going to match. So it's a practice that maybe we don't want to be doing within the situation we are in trying to show up for kid for who they are and how they show up. So what do, right? We've moved on to this idea of ignore the behavior, but not the child. Well, I want us to take a step closer and a little bit deeper in that and think about that child has an individual experience that's happening that is resulting in a behavior that is challenging to us. And so we've got to do a kind of a thought process, a root cause analysis of why are we getting this output, right? Why is their body adapting in that way? And what could be the underlying function or need? It takes relationship and knowing kid to be able to follow this process and to be able to figure things out. So step one, get to know the kid as best as possible and know that family and other educators around you are great resources to know more about why a student's body is adapting in the way that it is. Especially if that child doesn't have a communication mode that's understood by all, you might have to rely on others to help to give you a good breadth of information about that child as you're starting to build relationship with them. But I think about two big buckets, right? So that kind of goes into when you have a behavior. You're social and you're emotional, right? So you're social. So let's take an example, and let's through this lens. I had a student who would come in and bite my arm, and a greeting. She'd do it when she was coming up and a new person was coming in, right? We knew her well enough that she would get excited, come in, and she'd get really close to you, and she'd bite your arm. So that was a communication bid. So I'm going to respond to that a lot differently than a regulation need, okay, or an emotional need. So in a communication bit, I'm going to respond to the communication like, oh, how you doing? Happy to see you too, right? And sometimes we get it wrong. We make the best guess with the information we have, but we're responding to child. We're making it social. It's a positive interaction. Do I want to ignore the fact I'm getting hurt, that the unintended consequence of her communication style at this point is hurting me? No, I don't want to ignore that. I want to shape it. I want to redirect it. I want to move it into something that doesn't have the unintended consequence of hurting me. Because the intent was a greeting. The intent was a relationship building communication piece. And so I'm going to validate that. I'm going to validate child. I'm going to dive into that while I move my arm and have her, like we did some high five stuff and moved it into hands so that it could be an intense motion, and luckily that supplied a need for her, and so we were able to move it into hand stuff versus the mouth, and so we navigated going for hand, and so my arm, our arms were not in a biting range because we were squeezing hands and giving high fives, and we thought eventually it could do a wave, but she aged out of her classroom before we would know if that's a path we could have done. The next bucket, emotional or your regulatory system. So we've got a student, let's just take the same output. Biting, right? And we have the best idea that it's probably due to regulatory things. Then I'm going to dive into co-regulation. I'm going to start deep breathing. I'm going to do the same redirecting, right? I'm going to find a way that the unintended consequence of me getting harmed isn't there in the least amount possible. And it might be moving to having something on your arm so when they go to bite, it doesn't harm you as fast, and so now we can switch it, and we have time to not have the pain, to be able to get something else into that child's system, so that it could be a pressure piece if the pressure is needed, or a closeness piece if it's a hug, or proprioceptive input that body is seeking, so we can investigate while we try to figure out what are the co-regulatory practices we could be doing to help move that child forward. So when we think about when we have a behavior that is challenging to us, and we get into this idea of we don't want to reinforce it, we don't want it to become a pattern. Like that idea of what extinction is supposed to, that practice is supposed to take care of or help you with. I want us to shift our thinking and out of that clinical, medical fix-it view into how do we show up for kid. And I'm going to think kid-based, match kid. That's going to be an individual conversation of where you go with it. But I wanted you guys to know that I usually think in two buckets, whether it's like a direct communication bid or whether it is a co-regulatory piece. Sometimes they're a little bit mixed. But the piece is I'm showing up for you and who that child is, and I am navigating the unintended consequences of maybe getting harmed or having it be harm to self or others, or having it be so ununderstandable by most that we're going to try to redirect it so that that child has more positive interactions. But I'm not going to ignore the child. I'm not going to ignore the behavior or the output. I'm going to address both those things, but I'm not going to do it in what we typically do, which is a punitive fashion or you're broken, I'm going to fix you kind of fashion. It's in a supportive, I'm showing up for who you are and I'm going to help you be the best you can be on your path, right? And navigate it that way.